The Boston Tea Party, an iconic event of American history, is often romanticized as a daring act of rebellion by freedom-loving colonists against the tyrannical British rule. Yet, this event is shrouded in myths that sometimes overshadow its complex historical significance. This video aims to dissect the popular narratives and reveal the nuanced realities of that fateful night in 1773. To truly understand the Boston Tea Party, one must consider the broader tapestry of colonial grievances and the stringent British imperial policies of the 18th century. The backdrop of this historical event was a series of contentious acts imposed by the British Parliament, which began with the Navigation Acts and culminated in the more oppressive Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765. These were not mere economic burdens, but symbolized a deeper constitutional crisis over parliamentary authority versus colonial autonomy. As the British continued to assert their power with the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed duties on various goods imported to the colonies, colonial resistance intensified. This resistance took many forms, from intellectual arguments asserting the rights of colonists to organized boycotts of British goods. The colonial slogan "No taxation without representation" captured the essence of their argument. That it was unlawful for Parliament to tax them without their consent through elected representatives. The tension was further exacerbated by the Tea Act of 1773. While it reduced the overall tax on tea and was designed to help the struggling East India Company, it was seen as a cunning move to trick the colonists into accepting Parliament's right to tax them. Moreover, it granted the East India Company a virtual monopoly, threatening the livelihoods of colonial merchants and smugglers who had a significant stake in the tea trade. Colonial outrage was not limited to intellectual elites or radical agitators. It permeated all levels of colonial society, creating a widespread consensus that British policies were not just misguided but an existential threat to their rights and way of life. This broad-based opposition set the stage for the dramatic events of December 16, 1773, when frustration and anger would spill over into open defiance at Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party did not happen in isolation. It was the culmination of a decade of escalating conflict and a reflection of the deep-seated belief among colonists that they were entitled to the same rights as Englishmen, a belief they were prepared to fight for. The causes of the Boston Tea Party stem from a complex weave of economic, political, and social factors that coalesced into a defiant stand against what the colonists viewed as overreach by the British Crown and Parliament. The economic heart of the conflict lay in the Tea Act of 1773, which was passed by the British government to rescue the financially troubled East India Company by granting it a monopoly on all tea exported to the colonies and an exemption from the tea tax in Britain. This act did not impose a new tax on the colonies, but it reignited the debate over Parliament's right to tax the colonists without their consent. Politically, the act was seen as a direct assault on the autonomy of colonial businesses and an attempt to undermine colonial resistance to British taxation. The monopoly threatened to decimate the business of local merchants and smugglers who had previously profited from the trade in tea and other goods. The Tea Act was interpreted as an attempt to force colonists to recognize Parliament's authority to tax them indirectly. Many colonists also perceived it as a slippery slope that could lead to further impositions. Socially, the Tea Act sparked outrage across a broad cross-section of colonial society. From the working-class laborers to the wealthy elite, the act united diverse colonial factions against a common enemy. The colonial response to the Tea Act was swift and decisive, with many port cities refusing to allow the tea to be unloaded. Boston, however, became the flashpoint of this resistance. The Boston Tea Party was the direct result of a high-stakes standoff between the colonists and the British authorities. When British officials in Boston refused to allow the tea ships to leave the harbor without first paying the duties, local activists organized a dramatic protest. Dressed as Mohawk Indians, a group of colonists boarded the ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This act of open rebellion was a calculated response to what they saw as a series of abuses and an affront to their rights as Englishmen. The Boston Tea Party was not just a protest against a tax, it was a declaration of the colonists' deeply held belief in self-governance and economic freedom. It was a symbolic act of defiance against an empire that seemed increasingly out of touch with and hostile to the liberties and livelihoods of its colonial subjects. The event would escalate tensions to a breaking point and pave the way for the Revolutionary War, which would irrevocably alter the course of American history. The Boston Tea Party was an act of protest that has become emblematic of the American struggle for independence. It was a carefully orchestrated event that unfolded on the night of December 16, 1773. The seeds of defiance were sown as tensions boiled over in response to the Tea Act. Meetings were held at the Old South Meeting House, where thousands of colonists gathered to resolve the crisis, but to no satisfactory conclusion with the royal governor. That chilly evening, a group of about 60 men, members of a secret organization of American patriots called the Sons of Liberty, took matters into their own hands. They were led by Samuel Adams, a notable political leader who believed that the time for negotiations had passed. Disguised as Mohawk Indians, a symbol of freedom and autonomy, they boarded 3 ships moored in Boston Harbor: the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. Under the cover of darkness and in relative silence to avoid drawing attention, they worked with efficiency. Over the course of the evening, they cracked open the chests of tea and systematically dumped them into the harbor waters. An estimated 342 chests of tea, totaling over 92,000 pounds, about 46 tons, were destroyed in this act of defiance. Notably, the protesters took care to avoid unnecessary destruction. They did not harm the ships or their crew, and even replaced a padlock they had broken to gain access. The event was not universally praised at the time. Some colonists viewed it as an act of vandalism and feared reprisals from the British. However, to many others, the Boston Tea Party was a righteous act of resistance. It was a demonstration of the colonists' resolve and a clear message to the British Crown. The American colonies would not submit to taxation without representation or other infringements upon their rights. The response from the British was swift and severe, leading to the coercive acts, known in America as the Intolerable Acts, which further restricted colonial autonomy and contributed to the unification of the colonies against British rule. The Boston Tea Party did not start the American Revolution, but it was certainly one of the sparks that ignited the flames, symbolizing a turning point from peaceful protest to open rebellion. It underscored the resolve of the American colonists to fight for their rights and laid the groundwork for the Revolutionary War that would follow. The aftermath of the Boston Tea Party reverberated across both sides of the Atlantic. In Britain, the event was seen not as a mere protest, but as an outright rebellion that demanded a stern response. The British government's answer was the passing of the Coercive Acts in 1774, which were intended to punish the Massachusetts colonists for their defiance and restore British authority. Notably, the Boston Port Act closed the port of Boston until the East India Company was reimbursed for the destroyed tea, and the king was satisfied that order had been restored. These acts not only further inflamed tensions but also prompted a coordinated colonial response, leading to the First Continental Congress later that year. For the American colonists, the Boston Tea Party became a symbol of their resistance. It propelled other colonies to organize similar acts of protest and helped unify them against a common enemy. The destruction of the tea was more than just a protest against a tax, it was a stand against the very idea of British parliamentary authority over the colonies. It demonstrated the lengths to which the colonists were prepared to go to defend their rights to self-governance and economic independence. The significance of the Boston Tea Party cannot be overstated when considering the broader context of the American Revolution. It marked a definitive moment when the prospect of reconciliation began to diminish sharply. The act and the subsequent British crackdown galvanized public opinion in the colonies and became a rallying point for the Patriot movement. The Tea Party helped to forge a new American identity, separate and distinct from British rule. Furthermore, the event underscored the power of collective action and became a lesson in civil disobedience. It showed that a determined group of individuals, armed with a shared sense of injustice and a strategic plan, could challenge a global power. The legacy of the Boston Tea Party would go on to inspire future generations of activists and remains an enduring testament to the American spirit of resistance and independence. In the grand narrative of American history, The Boston Tea Party stands as a pivotal juncture between peaceful protest and the armed struggle that would lead to the birth of a nation. It exemplified the colonists' commitment to principles of liberty and democracy, ideals that would be enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and echoed in the founding documents of the United States of America. The Boston Tea Party holds significant relevance in modern times as a symbol of protest and revolution. It has been invoked in political rhetoric and activism as a representation of lawful dissent and civil disobedience. The act has been celebrated as an early display of grassroots activism, where ordinary citizens came together to oppose what they saw as unjust laws and governmental overreach. In contemporary politics, the Tea Party's symbolism was revitalized by the Tea Party movement, which emerged in the United States in the early 21st century. The movement adopted the historic event as a metaphor for their campaign against high taxes and government spending. It exemplifies how the Boston Tea Party continues to influence American political discourse, serving as an ideological touchstone for conversations about taxation, representation, and the rights of citizens. Educationally, the Boston Tea Party is a staple of American history curricula, often serving as a narrative tool to introduce students to the concepts of colonialism, representation, and the roots of American democracy. It provides a historical case study on the impact of civil protest and the role such actions can play in shaping national policy and consciousness. Socially, the Boston Tea Party is ingrained in American culture as an act of defiance and patriotism. It's often commemorated in Boston and beyond, with reenactments and celebrations that underscore its lasting place in the American saga. This continuous recognition reflects a broader cultural appreciation for the event's role in the larger story of American independence. The Boston Tea Party also resonates globally, cited in various international movements as an example of effective protest. It's become a symbol for anti-colonial and anti-authoritarian movements worldwide, showcasing how a pivotal moment in history can transcend its original context to inspire global calls for change. The enduring relevance of the Boston Tea Party lies in its encapsulation of a moment when citizens chose to act boldly for their perceived rights and freedoms. As such, it remains a powerful narrative about the efficacy of collective action, the importance of standing up against perceived injustice, and the impact such actions can have on the course of history. In this way, the Boston Tea Party transcends its 18th-century origins, offering a timeless lesson on the power of the people to effect change. The Boston Tea Party remains a powerful symbol of resistance and a pivotal moment on the road to American independence. It exemplifies the colonists' willingness to take radical action in defense of their principles and their determination to shape their own destiny. As we reflect on this chapter of American history, it's crucial to separate the layered truths from the simplistic myths, appreciating the full weight of the colonist struggle for liberty.